welcome back to the Pastor to Pastor podcast. My name is Brad Livingston. You've heard from me many, many times on the podcast. I usually get the honor to introduce our guests and hosts. And today, not only do we have an amazing guest, an amazing pastor in my own city in Pensacola, but also one of my friends. We go back a good ways now. And but without further ado, we're going to have a great conversation to get into. But I want to introduce him as Tyler Burns, Pastor Tyler. But on this podcast, it's just Tyler. And it's just Brad. So Tyler, welcome, man. We're glad you're with us,
bro. Thank you so much, man. I got to tour the new space, and what y'all are doing is incredible, man.
Thank you, dude. Thank you.
Yeah, we're real friends off the pod.
Yeah,
so.
I was in his wedding. I was there when
exactly.
he said I do. Yeah.
Significant. Yeah.
So
he got me to the altar. He pulled me.
You're
to
welcome,
the altar.
my Luna. That's his wife. Yeah, you're welcome. No, we are. Yeah, we're pumped, man, about the podcast. So, Tyler, tell us just a little bit about you. You're amazing. I know your family, your wife and your kids. But for those that haven't heard of you, just give us a little rundown of.
Sure. Yeah. So, born and raised Pensacola. Native son, Pops founded a church in 1992, Easter Sunday, and still in ministry, man. He just started pastoring a church in Alabama, which is really exciting. Yeah. And married to Marlena now for 9 years, almost 10. We're almost at that decade mark, and she's incredible. And we have two kids, Trinity, who's 6, Benaiah, who's 5. They're actually in the background here behaving.
That's right.
True church kids, true PKs, but have the honor and privilege of pastoring Rise City Church, a church that we relaunched. We took over our dad's church and then relaunched, and that was 2.5 years ago.
Come on.
And so that's been really amazing, and seen a lot of unexpected things and cool things, trying to figure it out. And man, also do some podcasting, some justice work, some things like that. So and I'm a PK, which is the subject of today.
The subject of today. That's what, when I hit you up, when you text me for today, it was like, hey, I'm probably gonna have my kids with me. I was like, that's fitting because we're talking about PKs. So no, it's good, man. Just to kind of catch the audience up, and one of our most embraced, listened to, and watched podcasts or YouTube videos, conversations really, was around the pastor's wife. So we've released tons of content for pastors, but when we started telling the stories of the pastor's wives, and the first episode was my mom and Vicky Pooley, which is Pastor Robert's wife.
Incredible people. Yeah.
And they were just telling their stories and what they've gone through and their perspective. And we heard over and over and over again, oh my gosh, finally someone's saying this out loud.
Yes.
Thank you for representing us. And as we just gained so much traction with that, I was like, man, I know a very underserved community in the pastor's house, which is the pastor's kids.
Absolutely, bro.
So I'm a PK myself. I've never not known my dad to be a pastor. He went through a season of life where he was in financial services, but he was still pastoring. It was just like he was, doing the dual job thing, the bivocational thing. But he's been a pastor my whole life, pretty much the same way. So we have a unique perspective. And so I wrote a blog. You got the chance to read it. And it's just called I Hate It Here. And
I'm tired of this church.
Yeah, I'm tired of this church. It was the scene that came to mind was the new Karate Kid. Yeah. Jaden Smith's, talking to his mom. His mom pulls him in a new area, and he's like, "I hate it here. I want to go home." Yes. And I was like, "Man, I can resonate with that." On a very funny level, of like when it's been an hour since church ended, your mom's still talking to whoever, and you're like,
"Yo, it's so funny you mentioned that." I had a situation where Trinity. It was 2 weeks ago, and somebody was talking to me, and she just leans over, whispers in my ear, "Can we go to the restaurant now?" It's hilarious.
It's like, I hate it. I want to go home.
She was just like, and she was real respectful about it, but she was just like, "Hey,
I'm over this."
Did she got to the point? It's a wrap. Like, let's go. She was just like, and I think she was discerning. The conversation that ended 10 minutes ago, but we just still talking.
They haven't, but mine caught.
Like, it's over. Like, let's go. I resonate with that.
Yeah, so it's funny, man. So we have that funny side of it where it's like, I hate it here. I want to go. But then there's the very real part of ministry life where you're like, man, like this sucks. Like like if dad could do anything else, right? Like if we could do anything else, and even, to the degree you're comfortable, I love to discuss,
for sure,
not necessarily not trauma, but just like the life that we've lived, and more importantly, how we can help pastors understand Your kids probably know more than you think they do. And B, you can actually cultivate future church leaders by bringing them into conversations as opposed to trying to guard them from things. Obviously, we want to guard our kids, right? But to a degree, it's like at some point, you got to kind of let them. If you bring them in, then you bring them in. It's going to be helpful. You know what I'm saying? So,
absolutely, bro. I completely agree.
But man, tell me a little bit of just like you're growing up a PK. What's your overall posture towards that? Not your parents. Like we love our parents, but our environment.
The environment. Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. I was recently reflecting on what that felt like for me. And I think it was in different stages and waves. I think in the early days, our church grew so rapidly because my dad's a tremendous strategic leader. And it grew so rapidly that I felt like it was exciting. It was almost like kind of the theme park idea. You're going to church, never know what to expect, never know how many people are going to be there, never know which location we're going to be at. I mean, there was excitement attached to it.
Yeah.
And then I went into a phase where, especially in my middle school years, where it felt like I was not welcome in the church. And I think it was mainly because, you're in a fishbowl, and the way in which church was in the 90s, everything with the pastor's family was very much so ornate. And, we'd have special seats on the stage, and, you have people that escort. You got a side entrance you go to. You couldn't do all the stuff. Like, I want to sit in the real way back of the sanctuary. Right. Your parents wouldn't let you do that. Yeah. And so there was this level to where I was like, I don't really know if I have the right space to actually be myself, to know who I am, to figure out actually what I've been called to do. And then that third phase, man, once I reached my high school years, I developed a strong dislike for the church. And then I felt like the church was a thief that was robbing me.
There it is.
Where it was supposed to be a life-giving community, I felt like it was a robber.
Yeah.
And I expressed that and actually came to grips with that and had to face that. And that fundamentally changed my relationship with the church from the time that started up until the time I came on staff. It just fundamentally changed the relationship that I had with the church.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because I think my question is, do you feel like that was a representation of you or do you, when you talk about it's robbing me? So I have spiritual community. It's supposed to be life-giving, but it's not life-giving. Right. It's life-taking. It's bringing the soul out of me. It's not adding value to my life. Do you feel like that was a representation of the church at the time? Or do you feel like that was a representation of what the church was doing to you as an individual?
That's a great question. I don't know if it was a representation of the church.
Because the church just goes in ebbs and flows. I want to be clear. It's like, so we go through ebbs and flows where some seasons, just let's be frank, are not as good as others, right? Absolutely. So I didn't know if you could pinpoint that or not.
Yeah, so I can pinpoint when it started for me and when I felt like there was a significant moment. I believe I was 16 and I was in one of my parents' offices because I was printing out a paper for school. I was a junior in high school. And I went to put printer paper back into the printer and I pulled out the drawer of the desk and I saw a letter and it had my name in it. And so I was just, I see my name. So I'm like, being a little nosy, like what's going on here?
Yeah. What's happening?
What's happening here?
Yeah.
So again, I was looking for printer paper, but I pulled out this letter. I read it. It was 5 pages. And in it, it was a group of elders from the church who had written my parents a letter basically saying, stop bragging about your son from the pulpit. We don't want to hear his accomplishments. We don't care what he's done at school. And specifically, they said he's not that special. And I remember being so shell-shocked, mainly because it was an anonymous letter. Like they had said that they were a collection, 3 elder couples or what have you. And back then we had like 50 elder couples. So it was just like, I can't like narrow it down. Like I knew who it was, but like I can't like, which is your kids know more than what you think. Right. I knew specifically who would talk like that.
Yeah.
But I was like, yo, this is bugged out. I was shocked. And I think what shocked me was I revered our leaders because I had this perception of church that said those in leadership are automatically, emotionally, mentally spiritually healthy people. And I had put them on a pedestal because the title mattered so much. Wow. I mean, the 90s, early 2000s, I mean, everything was about the title you had.
Yeah. Honor,
and now,
honor.
Big honor culture.
Yeah.
And I quickly had to face, people got deep-seated bitterness, toxicity, unhealed nature within them, emotional immaturity. I didn't think you could be a leader and have that too.
Yeah.
I thought, that's just for the people who are struggling. That's for the people who come down to the altar.
Right.
I didn't realize it. And I remember specifically saying, which relates to your blog, I specifically said out loud, I hate the church. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I meant big C church or little C church, but at that moment, it felt like little C church. Yeah. And I said, I'm cool with Jesus and I'll rock with the gospel. Yeah. But those people, they don't represent the gospel to me. Yeah. And so I just imported that to a deep disdain, dislike, hatred for the church where I was planted. And it was mainly because I didn't know people could be gifted and used by God, anointed, called, use all these talents, and also be emotionally immature. I didn't know that those two could exist within the same person, and God would still use them. Yeah. So I said, I hate this.
Yeah. You know how God uses crooked sticks to draw straight lines,
I didn't even realize. I was like, I know I got issues, I got problems, but I'm not in ministry yet.
Yeah, right.
Like I didn't even know if I wanted that.
No title. Yeah.
No title. Like I know I got issues. I got problems. I'm a teenager. Like I'm 16. Like I got issues. But I didn't know that God would use people to that extent. And then when you look at the scriptures, you see that.
Right. I think it's one of the things that I think we struggle with in that is that I think we can unpack together is about our fathers, because what you're talking about essentially is we have elders, high seated people in positions in our church with deep rooted insecurities and issues and problems. And I mean, neither one of our fathers are perfect, but I know, like in my opinion, there's no person in the world that has higher character, more integrity, truly wants what's best for people, like cares about people, than my dad. Yeah. Like better than me. Same. I tell people all the time, my dad's way better than me. Same. Like if you want a shepherd, he's the guy. I'm a systems teacher. That's my gift set. Yeah. He, way more apostolic leadership development. That's my jam. If you want a shepherd, you really want to call him. Absolutely. So to me, like his character and his integrity and his compassion and all of those things are so a part of who we are. But not only that, like the ways in which, and I know you can resonate this, the ways in which he had opportunities to go against his character to advance his own agenda. Exactly. Or opportunities to make more money or just whatever. Absolutely. And he turned them down over and over again, right? Because of his character. And then people who are on a similar platform to be so jacked up. Yeah. And not only be so jacked up, in some cases be the ones that are trying to put the metaphorical nails in my dad's hands and hang them on a cross.
Oh, 1,000%.
It's like...
Yeah. And around that same time, like I felt like there were a couple of instances where my dad got ambushed by leadership or things like that. And I remember that even exacerbated, like poured gasoline on it. And I don't know all the details. Right. I'm just telling you what's my perception. Right. So, I mean, it could have been legit. Right. Like it could have been them asking the question of like, hey, we just want to connect with you or whatever. But it felt like an ambush. It felt like they were coming at him. But I'll tell you, man, like one of the things that hurt me is, and my dad and I have talked about this, so, I want to be as real and authentic as possible. Like one of the things that did hurt me was I noticed that he calibrated after that. And after that letter.
So he gave in.
I noticed he gave in a little bit. Yeah. He stood in front of people and he affirmed one thing I remember, that he would never be ashamed of me. But especially when I came on staff, I noticed he calibrated. And I noticed that he was trying not to show the overt signs of favoritism. I know now that wasn't a rejection of me as much as it was him being wise and circumspect as a leader to make sure that people didn't think I was skipping steps in the process. But at that time, it felt like he had listened to them, even though I knew he hadn't. Yeah. This is a big part of like when you're in adjacent roles, familial roles to a pastor or a major high capacity leader, you will experience things you know cognitively are not true, but they will feel true to your body.
You'll respond to them internally.
You will respond to them because they will remind you of certain things that are rooted in your own insecurity, your own pain, your own fear, which is why one of the best things that could have happened for my father and I's relationship is for us to be able to now shift away from father-son to partners in ministry, and then to friends, and so that we could actually talk openly about what we were really feeling. And then in those moments, I feel like I learned so much better what he experienced.
Come on,
because I could not see the pressure that he had in that role. I just felt like, oh, you're giving in, and you're thanking everybody but me. You're doing all this stuff, you know. And then I realized that there was greater context to that, but it's not going to feel the same in your body, especially if you're not actually listening to what they're feeling. And even if they can experience it like you, our children feel things and they see things, and that's going to shape and change them.
I think it's so good what you said. It's like kind of what we talked about earlier. It's like, you know, a conversation between, in this particular instance, between your father and you, to say, hey, from the platform, these things I may accidentally be doing these things, you know, and it's not necessarily my goal or my agenda to show favoritism towards you, but you may not hear me do this as much, because like to have that conversation as opposed to just guarding us from it, to just say like, hey, I want to embrace and talk about other people's kids too. So you may hear your name less often, would have gone a long way. But again, I think in an attempt to protect us from the hurt, which is valid. Like it's valid that our fathers didn't want us to experience some of the things that were going on, but not understanding that we probably are more privy to it than, you know, pastor out there listening, your kids are more privy to it than you realize.
Talk about this, because you've said this a couple of times already. Like, what do you feel like why do our parents and specifically our fathers, why do you feel like they believe that we were hidden from it? Do you think they thought we were hidden from it? Or was it just like, what's that impulse to protect us?
Well, I mean, I think that this is an assumption, you know, like I'd actually be curious for me, you, and our pops.
Yeah, we actually got to actually talk about it.
I would actually love that. Like a follow up to this would be great with our fathers, because I would love to hear their perspective, and I think it'd be really valuable. I think at the end of the day, I think pastoring for our fathers became something that they didn't see it becoming. I think they experienced hurts they didn't see coming. I think they went through psychological abuse at the hands of elders and deacons and whatever. And I think it becoming something that they never knew it would become, and the hurts that they experienced that they never planned on experiencing, knowing that if there's a way I can make sure my kids don't experience this. You know, my dad always said, like, my dad went through hell in ministry, man, but the one thing he said over and over again is, I never wanted you to feel that way about the church. And I think it was always his way of trying to protect the institution, the capital C church, to me and my sister in particular at those ages that some of the greatest hurts were going on. And then as we got older, my adopted brother and sister, I think his whole thing was like, the church is still the hope of the world. And I refuse to paint the picture for you that it's evil, that it's maniacal, that, you know, that the people in it are just as jacked up as the people outside of it. I want you to always feel like this is a place where hope is still found. And he really tried to do that. The unfortunate part is, you know, sometimes the voice of those talking is so loud. They can't block us from it, and they can't drown it out. And I think that's what both of us
group with their kids, and they're, you know,
my mom said at the kitchen table that
your dad did this.
I mean, I remember vividly, 10 years old, my very best friend at the church we were at the time, when that church got rid of my dad, I remember calling him to see if he wanted to come over and stay the night at my house, and him telling me, like, I don't have to be friends with you anymore, because now my parents aren't trying to be friends with your parents. And I was like, what? Like, but again, no one sat him down and was like, by the way, he heard something at a dinner table or at breakfast or in the car with his parents, and it shaped it. So it's like, we really can't protect the kids from it the way we think we can. So we're actually better to equip them with knowledge. Obviously, guarded knowledge, and they're never going to get the full story, at least not when they're 8, 9, 10, But I think in doing so, if we can equip our kids, we're not leaving them to the ignorance of the stories they hear or the versions that they read.
That's good.
They're actually equipped. And so I think that just matters a lot,
That greatest fear, though, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like one of the greatest enemies to PKs, not just simply becoming healthy church leaders, but simply remaining in the church, the greatest enemy of that is that cynicism.
Yeah, 100%.
And developing a cynical perspective on church, a cynical perspective on the things of God.
Sure.
And losing that hope that really gives the church its life.
Yeah.
Its breath. Just to be able to hope that it can get better. People's lives can be changed. And that can be true for me. Yeah. Even as a church leader, as a pastor, like I can be transformed in the midst of this community as much as somebody else can. And I think our parents, specifically our fathers, desired that hope to still live within us.
Yes.
And that's why a lot of times it would protect us. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think now I'm asking the question, how do I bridge that gap better for my children, where it's not just they're always around, but now there's a better opportunity for them to actually know what's going on without knowing all the gritty little details, but that they know the church is also a place where people are healing and they're growing. Absolutely. And we are too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think even going along with that is recognizing, one of the things I think all pastors need to realize is your kids are actually your kids are one leg of your ministry that's necessary for growth. So if you don't...
Talk about this, bro. Talk about this. This is good.
If you don't disciple your children, but not only disciple them, if you don't see them, encourage them in the ministry, you're neglecting a multi-generational ministry model. Paul was unapologetically favored Timothy. Elijah unapologetically favored Elisha because he saw in them what they would become, and they led them into that space. So when the other prophets were looking at Elisha, your master's going to leave there. He's like, they weren't on the same playing field. Exactly. They knew that, and he knew that. And I think for that, it's like we have to realize that pastors, your kids are the future, not just the futures, and they might become pastors, they might become worship leaders, but they are the influencers of the same demographic that ultimately will bring other kids their age to your church. So who they play basketball and baseball with, they'll have an impact on those kids, and those families may eventually come to your church. So your children are, whether they become pastors or not, whether they have those gifts or not, they actually are one of the legs of growth for your church. So if you wait till they're 18,
that's
and
good.
then, let me try to shape this, well, you've missed out on adding value and identity. So what I believe, my belief is that every child, we say 8 years old is the mark for us. So we aim for, at our church, 8 years old is the mark where we start establishing identity and design.
Yes.
So you have this gift in you. So let's partner you with a team at 8 years old. Some of them have to wait till 10, maturity, yada, yada. But it's like you have a design in you, and your design actually has purpose. So let's tie you to the body.
Yes.
Let's connect you to, rather than let's wait till you get to students or whatever. We want to, as early as possible, identify their identity and their gift set that God has designed them to be, and then introduce them to the ways in which the church is actually the place to fulfill that. You don't have to go somewhere else to do it.
I'm still in that. That's brilliant. That's so good, bro.
So we're still working on it. We haven't figured that whole model out. And you're dealing with kids that, depending on their parents, they're at different places in the developmental process. So all of that it's a lot to do, but it's just necessary. And we've decided to take on the hard work of doing it. And so we've seen great successes. We've tripped over a lot of potholes in the process. But all that to say is we're leaning forward. And that's our goal, is we want to lean forward with this, so that the kids are getting frustrated as they're being developed, not as they're being denied.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's our goal with them. And
that's the thing. They may not be able to be in the room with you. Yeah. But they can be in a room with you. Put them somewhere.
Put them somewhere.
It doesn't necessarily have to be. And I think this is part of the thing that makes us so powerful, is we're so often used to being seen, not heard.
Right.
And so we're in these rooms and we feel invisible. So we develop this idea that not only do other people not see me or they see me negatively, but now does God see me? Like we start to import all these questions. We're asking deeper questions at earlier ages than what our parents even know.
Yeah. If the church doesn't see me, does God see me? If the church doesn't care, does God care? If the church doesn't see my gift, does the gift even matter, or is it even there? I think all this
so good.
What you're talking about.
So it's like we got to put somewhere, just have some sort of room for them to have at least open dialogue to be able to talk about it. And I think what you're saying though is it requires some intentionality.
Yeah.
And it requires us to make some choices about where we spend our time and our energy.
And even in our culture, it's like, so I have 2 XPs. So I have one XP, dots the I, cross the T's. He's the dollar guy, no kids. Right. I got another XP, 2 teenagers.
Oh man.
Both of them were adopted. So there's a lot of dynamics there. And he adopted them when they were young enough to be kids in church. Now they're older teenagers, but there would be kids in church. And so their perspective is so different. When we got 10 kids running through the lobby or the auditorium or whatever, one of them was like, somebody needs to get these kids.
Right. Another's like,
the other one's like, we get it, bro. But my language has always been talking about culture and talking about like how the culture of your house. My language has always been, I want our kids to want to be here.
Yes.
And we will scrape the edge of too loud and too rambunctious almost all the time. We will constantly have to say, hey, come here, you're getting too close to those instruments. But I would rather them know that this is a place that they can thrive in.
Yes.
And one day they will play those drums than to be so scared of going near them that they never pick up the gift that they have inside of them. So we are constantly, if you come on a worship rehearsal on Thursday nights, it's not uncommon for some random kid to be up there with a toy guitar, just going to work next to his dad.
Same, bro.
And there's so much beauty in that because we're like, release the gift and who knows if that kid's ever going to do that. But the reality is he knows this is the place I can figure it out.
It's so funny you mentioned that. I was sitting down with somebody after church again, and the kids were released from Kids Men, and they started running around. So one of the things that we do is we flip the sanctuary every week. So every Sunday we flip it for midweek.
Okay.
And so we have tables and chairs. We just have a completely different setup. So now it's become like just kind of service tradition. After the second service, everybody kind of helps out and flips it. And the kids started running around. And there was like a moment where I was like, because my kids were joining in, I was like, that black dad, I was like, I don't know if and then like I felt even the Lord say to me in that moment, because I grew up hearing, this is God's house.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the sanctuary. This is God's house. Mm-hmm. But I felt even in that moment, the Spirit of God stopped me and say they feel comfortable enough that this is their house.
That's right.
And you would only do this if you felt comfortable enough that this was your house. Yeah. Like if I run around and play with my friends who also have volunteer parents and who are also serve team and who are also ushers and greeters and who are also at administration and band and worship. If I play with them, these are my brothers and my sisters. This isn't like some random thing. I'm not going to break it just because I play with them. Yeah. And it was actually a moment of encouragement that my kids will actually see this as a safe place for them in ways that I did and maybe ways I didn't even because I know better. And then they'll take it further than I can, for their kids as well.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I always, the ways that I've been thinking of this over the years, we just walked through my building. We've only been in there for 4 years now, 4 years. And there's tons of things that it's like we were just really intentional about in the beginning of getting in there. But that was a huge part of it for me I've always thought to myself, no one wants to go to a stranger's house, but you want to invite your friend to your father's house.
That's good, bro.
And so that's
good.
That's my thing is like, I'm
still in that too.
I want when these teenagers or kids, when they invite their friends, I want them to feel like they're inviting them to the place that they can metaphorically and maybe sometimes literally kick off their shoes. Where it's like, let me show you my favorite place to hide. Let me, like, you know what I mean? Like, and you know what? Like, if like I said, we'll scrape the edge of some people calling the church sometimes, being like, there were kids running around a little too much. It's like, maybe.
Yeah.
But I'll take that phone call once a month.
Yeah.
To know that the kids in my church know that this is my Father's house.
They get excited to come to church.
They want to come to church, bro. Like,
and this is the thing. We pray for things and then we despise what we pray for.
Exactly.
So we're like,
it didn't happen the way I wanted.
We need more young people in here. And then all of a sudden, young people run around, and then you're like, man, there's too many young people running around. It's like,
literally, yes.
God is like, you prayed, you asked me for this, I gave it to you, and now you got to embrace the implications of that, the reality of that, which is it's not going to be something you can control and put in a box. Right. You know?
Well, because the reality is, to true leadership fashion, you attract what you are.
Yes.
So if you deny a portion of what you are, you're denying the ability to attract it. So for young pastors who have kids, if you deny the portion of your church, which is your children acting like children, then you're denying your ability to attract that same demographic. Good. But what you're unconsciously doing is making sure that 20 years from now, there is no church because you did not embrace the church.
Yes,
that demographic of the church when they were present, right? So I think that's an important thing we have to learn. So we have this leg of growth that we have to understand as pastors, that with our kids, that's a leg of growth. And I don't just mean numerical growth, I just mean vision growth. You understand things different when you start embracing the reality of children and your PKs and asking them questions like, your kids have better discernment than you think they do.
So this kind of gets into, I think, what's a crucial idea, which I think for a lot of pastors, they romanticize their kids being in church. But I think it's harder when there's middle school, high school, teenagers in church because there's so much changing in their identity. And one of the things that I found to be so important is for especially the teenagers to see visually that their parents are going on a journey towards spiritual maturity and emotional health. And I found that to be a massive game changer for us. Yeah. Because, we've been going through, we just finished another round of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, that course with Peace Gazzaro, where the idea and the thesis is it's impossible to be spiritually mature if you're emotionally immature. And what I found is that parents letting their teenagers in on that process, letting them into watching them walk through confronting. So you have multiple generations in the room having to sit at a table being like, oh, I didn't hear this from my father. I didn't hear this from my mother. I didn't get this. To actually be able to, in a multi-generational space, own certain stuff. Wow. Yeah. I think that's going to be crucial for us actually seeing middle and high school actually open up. And it's not just the fun stuff. It's not just the gifts that we give them, the trips that we take, the vacations, but do they see a consistent pattern of us being emotionally vulnerable enough for them to know we haven't made it yet? Because I think that's where middle school and high school gets a little frustrated, starts to act out a little bit because they see, oh, well, all these adults have figured it out. Yeah. When in reality, we figured very little out. Right. But we're just doing what we have to do. Yeah. And we're still learning. We're still growing. We're still in that evolution and that growth of discipleship in Christ. And so I think that the more that we can expose them to emotional vulnerability, emotional health, spiritual maturity, that pathway, you'll start to see middle and high school students open up just a little bit to say, oh, my parents, and this is major. It seems so small. If you're a pastor, can you look at your son and your daughter and ask them, when was the last time you heard me apologize? Wow. Some of the most meaningful, memorable moments of my relationship with my father is when he sat across from me and said, I apologize. I'm sorry. Wow. That's one of the most meaningful things that you can say. Not, here's a great lesson on this obscure doctrine. Not, let's talk about this sermon. Not, let's figure this thing out. Not, make me proud. No, it's when you can look across from them and say, I'm sorry. I messed up. Yeah, I missed it. I missed the mark on this. That right there is transformative. And I think what we'll see is middle and high school students now don't care about no show. Yeah. Like, sure, they like the stuff, but they're not into it just for that. They're into it because, is this real for you? Authenticity. Yeah. Has this changed your life? Are you just saying it on stage and then living differently off it? Man, that's so good. And I think that right there will be a game changer and unlock a lot for so many pastors. Yeah, I think that, I think what most pastors probably fail to realize, particularly if their kids are in the public school system, I think this is true in general, but I think it's heightened in the public school system. For sure. Is your kids are growing in intelligence
and in psychological and cultural and societal things.
Exposure, bro.
Exposure way faster than we were 10, 20 years ago. So if you're guarding them from discipleship conversations, but they're being inundated with society norms.
Oh, somebody's discipling them.
they're being discipled. It's just not by Christian men and women, right? And I think what you're saying is so good that we have to put discipleship on display, not just demand.
Yeah, bro.
So it's like we have to display this to our teenagers, not demand it from them. It's like you do as I do, not just as I say, right? And I think that's a big deal for parents, especially pastors. And I love that, man. I think what you said is so good. That when's the last time you apologized? And because that's a reflective moment. Are you always just the kingpin? Yeah.
And they see as we get older. What I saw was, oh, my dad's always my hero, still to this day.
Yeah.
But he a human hero.
Yeah.
He's really human.
Yeah. The veil has been removed.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. When you get to that age, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You mess up too, huh?
Yeah. I thought you were perfect.
Yeah. I thought you was perfect. You gonna preach on Sunday like that?
Jesus, Paul, you. I don't know. Right.
You and Paul might be in a competition. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that right there, I'm like,
no, that's a lot. That's healthy.
They see you.
Yeah.
And we got to be honest about that.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, part of what this touches on is, are you ministering out of the desire or need to perform? And I think if we are performing, we will take that performative mindset that we have on the stage. We'll take that performative mindset we have on Sunday morning, and we'll just keep the mask on when we go home.
Yep.
And really, the first call of any believer in Jesus is not to do, but to be.
Yeah, come on.
And he is calling us to be.
Wow.
And I think that has been a game changer for me in recognizing, oh, I could win at ministry and fail with my kids. I could fail with my daughter and my son because I'm just trying to win.
Yeah.
And I think in previous generations, they felt that pressure so acutely.
Yeah.
And I think now we're able to have a different level of authenticity and vulnerability. Yeah. And there are different challenges. But I think we're going to be able to kind of cut that, kind of that stronghold off of this generation.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I was literally sitting with a group of pastors last night and talking with them, and two of them are on staff together, pastors together, and both of their kids are going into ministry, it looks like.
Wow.
Older teenagers, so 16, 17, 18.
That's amazing.
That age bracket. They're like, talking about going to SCU and some of these things, and they're like, I'm terrified. And I was encouraging them. I said, you guys have worked really hard to build something so different than what you were handed. That you can relish in how great it's going to be rather than having to fear that they'll have to go through the same things. And I think that that's the beauty of what you're talking about, that, pastors that are listening, one thing I'll encourage you with is if you're raising your family and leading your church family dynamic the same way that you were 10 years ago, or the same way you watch someone else do it, you're probably not doing it well.
That's good, bro.
You need to build something better. Build something better. Build something different than what you were handed. Because then I think you can have a confidence that you can entrust the next generation into something that you intentionally created rather than unintentionally inherited. And so I think that's the opportunity for a lot of the pastors out there is really take assessment, going along with the apologizing and the emotional vulnerability and those contexts of discipleship within our home framework is also to say, am I unintentionally and subconsciously recreating the same thing I was handed?
Yes.
And if I was,
good,
you
bro.
can go back and look at all the ways you wished it was different. So do it differently, And I think that comes full circle. One thing I was going to mention earlier, you were talking about it, is we were talking about in our homes. I want to revisit the letter that you talked about that you found. Because one of the things I think that some pastors, so I think most pastors fall into one of two categories. They don't push their kids enough to be all that they can be, or they push their kids too hard
too much
to be all that they want them to be. And I am, that's a pendulum swing. I think you're never settled in the middle, right? Yeah, but the thing that I think I wish my dad had done, and I think it sounds like you feel the same way, is when they come in and say, your kid's not special. or you talk about your kid too much, or or you give him too many opportunities. Why he's too young for that. He shouldn't be getting that kind of opportunity. Is that the pastor would stand up, or that our father would stand up and say, "You have no idea what I've been putting him through to get him ready for this." Like he's probably had more leadership conversations than you have.
Right.
I've poured into him at the kitchen table and in the car rides when we were sleeping. We swept this sanctuary 400 times when nobody was here. And I was talking to him about caring for the little things. And if you're faithful with the little, I'll make you. I was discipling him behind the scenes at ages you can't fathom. So the fact that he gets an opportunity is not because he's special. It's because I've invested.
Yes.
And because I've invested, I'm looking for the return.
That's an advantage for the church.
Yes. And so it's like, if our fathers, not our fathers literally, but if pastors, if you're out there and you have kids, if you're putting in the work to them, you're having the conversations at the dinner table, you're investing 10 times, 100 times, maybe in some cases 1,000 times more than other people are investing in their kids.
It's exponential.
So the fact that they would get opportunities is not unusual. It's the same way Steph Curry can shoot the basketball different than everyone else on the court. Why? Because he was on the court at 3 years old watching form, and his dad was showing him stuff behind the house that no one ever saw on a video camera. But when he finally got a chance to shoot the shot, and then when he got to Davidson, I'm sports analogy, but when he got to college, people were still doubting him. But there was work being put in that people didn't see. So he had an expectation of himself, and his father had an expectation that superseded what other people thought was possible. And I think that's the same thing. It works that way in the church world, where pastors, if you're investing in your kids and you're investing in your children, then don't shy away from the opportunities that should be afforded to them because of your investment, and be willing to take it on the chin, be willing to experience the growth pains, be willing to sit with the older saints and go, I know they didn't communicate that just right. I know that probably wasn't the best way to handle it. I know that wasn't the way that I would have done it, and I'm going to talk to them. But think about it. A 21-year-old just saw that. Yeah. A 20-year-old just experienced. Like, he just had a developmental opportunity that most people don't get till they're 35 at 20. Can you imagine where he's going to be at 30?
Yeah.
Like, just to have those things. So I just want to encourage those pastors, if you're investing at the rate that most of you are investing, then don't be ashamed of opportunity. Yeah. And your elders or deacons or just people in the church, they are not going to understand that because they haven't been at the table for those.
Yeah, that's so good, bro. And then what's a testament to that is, I said at 16, I hate this church.
Yeah.
And then 5 years later, I'm on staff. And, almost 10 years later, 9 years later, I'm running the church. Yeah. I'm leading the church. Mm-hmm. And so isn't it like God to, in those moments where, I felt like I was exposed to too much, overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. My parents tried to do the best that they could. But isn't it like God when you hate a place, he calls you to lead the place. Yeah. He calls you to love the place. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why I came on staff, it wasn't because I had to. It was because God gave me a massive love, a capacity to have a heart that could love the people, some of even the people who had wronged me. Yeah. Some of the people who had said things and they're just leaking. And just leaking out of a hurt soul.
Come on. Yeah.
And bro, I think it's so crucial and important for us to never look at our kids as, they got an unfair advantage. It's a God advantage to be able to do this. I'm not saying you skip steps. I'm not saying you ignore basic stuff. I'm saying this is a tremendous advantage. Who better to know what God has placed in the house?
Come on, man.
They literally, I got saved under my father's teaching in the house. I was there the first Sunday. I was picking up chairs. I was dragging chairs with my little blanket at 3, doing all this stuff. And then now I'm able to say I have not just institutional memory of what it is, not just skill and anointing and gift, but now I'm actually able to say I have a DNA of service because I watched those moments where not as many people showed up, but my dad still preached.
Come on, yeah.
Not as many people came to the event, but they still pulled it off with excellence. Not as many people showed. And if you think about that, that's years of, seminary doesn't teach you that. Bible school doesn't teach you how to show up when people aren't.
Facts.
No, they teach you the nuts and the bolts, and that's great. But at the end of the day, that grit comes from a different place.
That's right.
And that was me sitting at my father and my mother's feet, seeing them serve when it was unpopular.
Yes.
And when it was unsuccessful. Yeah. And that's a tremendous advantage. And 100%. I wish that we would have done that sooner. I think my father did that later on.
Yeah.
But there's a level to which I'm like, man, I wish I would have seen that sooner.
Yeah.
Because I feel like people would have gotten a different perspective. But I think we were all learning what that meant at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think even with that, I think about generational covenants, I think that generational blessing and generational favor, right? And, as you're even unpacking that, it's like, we walked under the generational favor of our fathers, so going back to it, it's like we have access to development that a lot of kids won't have access to. But we also have demands that a lot of kids will never have.
Look,
the demand of perfection on us. I mean, how many elders, deacons, church members were watching their kids wild out, but yell at our dads for what we were doing?
Look,
and it's like, this impossible standard for children is set.
And then when we came on staff, they were like, all right, now holding us to that standard. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now you,
yeah, right.
But so now, and it's like, you don't realize the demands. You don't realize how many events like I missed out on, how many trips got cut short. How many times I fell asleep in worship practice because my father came to pour into somebody and they just, their heart broke, in front of him and he had to pour in and my mom had to pour in. How many times we've gone without stuff because my parents were sowing faith seeds or making up bills or from the church.
Hate it here, I want to go home.
Look, how many times we were there on days you don't even know about.
Yeah.
How many times we were like, man, it's going to be okay. We encouraged our parents.
Yeah.
And we saw all this.
Yeah. And so then we get placed on these unrealistic expectations on us that we're supposed to live up to that we never agreed to. Yeah. I was just born into this family. I didn't say yes to this.
Choose this.
But then more importantly, going back to this, going back to our fathers, it's like, so we have generational, so there's generational favor because we're giving legacy opportunities, which by the way happens in every industry across the world. So why we bat our eye at it in the church, I don't know.
For sure, man.
But even beyond that, I think to your point is the opportunities that are afforded to us are the byproduct of the sacrifice within our generational covenant.
Yes.
What I mean by that is so it's hard for anyone in the church to understand sacrifice the way that we talk about it because your vacation didn't get cut short.
Yeah, no.
Because of a church emergency. Mine did.
Yeah.
So I know what it looks like to put the church above everything. Yeah. Your family dinners didn't get interrupted at least once a week. For a phone call. Mine did.
About some nonsense.
Right.
Our restaurant trips didn't get interrupted because people literally pulled up a chair and sat at the table when I was getting ready to tell my dad about this issue I was navigating.
Right.
It's like, all right, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, so you've got, your family dinner's interrupted, your family vacation's interrupted, just you playing ball with your pops gets interrupted, all for the sake of the church. And so my point is there was a unrequested sacrifice made on our part. And we paid it with our attention and our time involuntarily.
Yeah.
Therefore, for God to repay that sacrifice with wisdom and knowledge and abilities that go beyond our years is not unusual because that's what God does when people have unusual sacrifice. He also meets it with unusual, miraculous provision, right? And so for the pastor that's out there, your kid actually might be that special.
Yeah.
That's good, because there's a level of sacrifice from your family that has been placed that God responds to that, right?
That's so good. And it kind of gets down into it's hard for us to see that because we westernize the scriptures. So if you take a look at the covenants God made, God would make a covenant not with the man, but with the house, with generations.
It's not a person, it's a people.
It's not just a person, it's a people.
Yeah, come on.
So if you think about it, it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
That's right.
So it's that's your generational line right there. The patriarchs,
Blood went on the house, not on the child.
Exactly.
Come on.
It went on the doorpost.
That's right.
That's symbolic. It's not just you put a little blood cross on the firstborn's forehead. Yes. No, it's the house.
The house.
And I think we don't see that. So it feels like an offense. It feels like cheating.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people unnecessarily take advantage of it. 100%. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not God's intent. But I think more times than what we know, God is saying for this region, for this moment, I made a covenant with this house.
That's right.
And if they stay true to their end of the covenant, I will bless them.
That's right.
But I will also challenge them to meet the standards of what the covenant requires.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's hard for us to understand because in the West, it was like, yo, everything is my own individual effort and I earned it and everything. And it's like, you're going to have to earn it.
Yeah.
I had to earn it.
Yes. In more ways than most people will ever realize.
And this is the thing. Like I say, I'm so glad. Like my dad, he said, I wanted to turn the church over to you in a quote unquote better position than what I was able to. And I told him, I said, nah, I'm so glad I had to get out the mud.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I had to get out the mud. Like there's something about that taught me so much that I wasn't handed something that was flying.
Yep.
I had to pull people together. I had to have those real hard conversations where my dad couldn't talk.
Yeah.
You know, I had to have those difficult conversations, those calls where, man, I felt like I had a good day. And then I get that call and they're like, Pastor, I can't believe you did this. And it's an hour and a half later. And I'm like, all right, let me pray and you know, go to bed and try again the next day.
Yeah, but you learn how to kill some things and breathe life into things, right? It's like there's things that needed to go away and you learn how to kill those things gracefully as you possibly could. And there's things you had to breathe life into that it was what God gave you for the house that your father couldn't see. Exactly. And I understand that myself. Man, so it's like,
I know you get that.
There's a lot of value in that.
I know you overstand that.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, that's the beauty within what we're talking about is that if we look at our children correctly, man, we can not only understand that they have the power to help grow our church, they have the ability to help deepen our knowledge for a generation, that we don't ignore them too soon. But more importantly, that, you know, pastors, your kids out there, they know more than you think they do. They see more than you think they do. They hear more than you think they do. Therefore, you may be protecting them from what they need to be educated and knowledgeable enough to know what truth is, as opposed to whatever version of the lie they're getting.
That's so good.
And so, you know, I think discernment comes into play here for pastors, where it's like the Holy Spirit's going to lead you to encourage your kids, but I want to encourage you to let them be part of this. Yes and amen. So, exactly. But it's like, let them be part of this.
The altar is open.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. PKs are in the back.
The altar is open. Yeah.
But all that to say is, that we can do that. But also for pastors out there that you're undercutting your kids. You're robbing them of the place, the opportunities, and in some cases the positions that God has supernaturally prepared them for, but you're waiting on people who have yet to even pray about your kids give you the green light on whether or not they should be there.
Exactly.
It's like they hadn't prayed about this. Yeah. This is what they feel.
Yeah.
And so I think it's stepping beyond that, you know.
The ultimate job of protecting the pastor's kid that's God's job, ultimately.
Yeah.
So God knows better than the pastor knows what the pastor's kid needs.
Come on, man.
And I think we have to relinquish that there's sometimes we won't know what specifically we're supposed to do for our children. But what we know we're supposed to do is we're supposed to love them, care for them, teach them the way.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to walk with them. And I think sometimes we're obsessed with protecting our kids.
Yeah.
And I think we need to relinquish the need to protect them from every little thing. And we actually need to say, God, give me wisdom to love them well, teach them well, have them follow your way. And as a result, see them flourish in what they've been called to flourish in. And that's the goal. The goal is not every PK ends up being a pastor.
Right.
The goal is not every PK ends up being a minister or in ministry. The goal is that every PK has an opportunity to flourish.
That's right.
Because shalom, completeness, wholeness, flourishing is the ultimate idea for every image bearer.
Yeah. And
so I believe that if our goal is the same as what God desires for all image bearers in our unique situation, in our, generational covenant in some cases, which I believe was the case for both of us.
Yeah.
If our goal is that our children will flourish and would testify of the Lord, then our aim changes.
Yeah.
and we kind of relinquish playing a little relational chess.
Mm.
Playing the little reindeer games here and there, playing the politics. Sometimes you'll have to do that. Other times you have to relinquish that and say, God will control what people think. Yeah. And ultimately, if you're predisposed to not hearing me, there's nothing I can say that can convince you otherwise. If you're predisposed against my child, nothing I can say that can convince you otherwise. 100%. So I'm going to love them, and I'll let God deal with you.
Yeah.
And the rest is the rest.
100%. 100%. And I think that's where so much value is, because at the end of the day, Pastor, you're called to bring every person in your church to the highest level of faithfulness and following God that they can. And so if your child has a higher capacity than others to do that, you also have a responsibility to them, just like you have a responsibility to everyone else, right? So it's like at the end of the day, you're also pastoring them too. And so we want to see all of our kids going to fullness. And that's why I keep coming back to it. It's like your church should be the place where their design is developed and not... has life spoken into it. And so I encourage every pastor that's out there, man, put your foot forward on that. And I think we'll see things change for this generation of pastors' kids. They don't have to struggle the way we did.
Exactly.
So
they're struggling the right ways.
Struggling the right ways. That's good. That's good.
Not the unnecessary ways.
Come on, man.
Let's struggle in the right ways and put our energy there.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, bro, I appreciate you coming on, man.
My guy.
Absolutely. I knew this would be a conversation for
encouraged me. I got sermon notes for the next 3 weeks, man.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
Come on.
Y'all don't watch the stream now. I'm about to take all this.
Take it. I heard a voice. Oh, man.
As I always say.
Right. So, well, guys, thank y'all so much for tuning in. My bad. To the Pastor to Pastor podcast. We are so grateful that you spent some time with us. I pray this was helpful. If you know a pastor that you can share this with, please make sure you do it. What we know is pastors' wives and pastors' kids are the two most under-communicated and underrepresented demographics when it comes to help. And so this is an opportunity to make sure that your pastor's kids stay healthy. And if you're a pastor that has kids, your kids stay healthy. So if we can help in any way, reach out to us. You can check us out at pastor2pastor.life. All the details are coming at you as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tyler, I'm grateful. We'll catch you guys next time for another episode of the Pastor to Pastor podcast.
Peace.